The marriage between Hua Xiaotan and Li Sun had long been regarded as a perfect match in the martial world, a union of talent and beauty, a match made in heaven. But both Hua Xiaotan and Li Sun knew it was nothing more than a business deal between two prominent families of the martial world, made for mutual benefit. Li Sun was always honest with her, never hiding his ambition to dominate the martial world. Sometimes, he even sought her advice, discussing the affairs of various factions with her. He didn't guard against her because he knew her nature. Even if it wasn't love, once married, she was his woman, and she would think of him in all things, just like countless women who treated their husbands as the center of their worlds. Though she was mild in temperament, she took good care of him, checking on his well-being, bringing him tea, cooking meals for him personally. The people of the manor would say she was virtuous and capable, but no one dared to claim that she and Li Sun were deeply in love. They weren't a loving couple. In fact, many arranged marriages were like theirs. Perhaps she was luckier than most. Her husband respected and valued her. She lacked nothing in terms of food, clothing, or material goods, and he never seemed inclined to take a concubine, even after 3 childless years of marriage. Though Li Sun frequented brothels, as men of power often did, there was a period when he grew particularly close to Feng Hua, the top courtesan at Drunken Beauty Pavilion. Rumors began to circulate that Feng Hua might soon enter the manor as a concubine. Hearing such rumors often enough, Hua Xiaotan came to believe she might have to share her husband. She even had a servant bring her a book on how wives and concubines could coexist. One day, while out shopping for clothes, she ran into Feng Hua. The woman was beautiful, carrying herself with the grace of an official's daughter, without a trace of the usual brothel coarseness. Hua Xiaotan thought privately that she seemed like a gentle soul. But unexpectedly, Feng Hua's words to her were sharp and cruel. "The manor lord really enjoys my skills in bed, sister. You should learn from me. Otherwise, when I enter the manor, sister, you might be left alone for quite some time." After that encounter, Hua Xiaotan no longer liked Feng Hua, but since Li Sun seemed to favor her, she kept quiet. However, the rumored wedding never happened, and the gossip eventually faded. She tentatively asked him one day, "Why haven't you been to Drunken Beauty Pavilion lately?" He was in the middle of undressing and paused for a moment before saying, "Drunken Beauty Pavilion? I don't really remember the names of these brothels. I just go wherever they suggest. I don't particularly care about those places." Her heart filled with joy at his casual response. He didn't know how much happiness his offhand words brought her. She remembered their conversation 2 weeks after their wedding. "I know there's no love between us," he had said, "but since you're my wife, I won't let you suffer." No, he didn't know she loved him. He was the vibrant, heroic figure of her youth. Li Sun, the eldest son of the Li family manor, was the most talented among his peers, gifted and poised, quick-witted and resourceful. His name was always mentioned alongside legends. He was the idol of young men and the dream lover of young women. Before their marriage, Li Sun had been a bright, distant figure in her mind, but after marrying him, he became the indelible mark in her heart. The Li Sun she knew now was different from the youthful hero of legend. He was mature, steady, and commanding, his gaze always cool and detached. He didn't speak much, often using short responses like or "oh." He frequently praised her for her quiet nature. During festivals, after drinking more than usual, he would say, "I'm lucky to have married you." She and he were very much alike, both preferring silent companionship to noisy crowds in the bustling streets. But as husband and wife, was this kind of relationship fortunate or unfortunate? When Li Sun returned to the room, he found Hua Xiaotan lost in thought by the window. She had been daydreaming more and more lately, always seeming troubled. He thought he knew her well and didn't believe she had anything on her mind. In the past, he wouldn't have asked, but now, with important events looming, he had an uneasy feeling. Softly, he asked, "What are you thinking about?" Startled by his voice, she smiled and replied, "I'm thinking about what to get you for your birthday." "There's no need to put effort into that. We both know birthdays are just an excuse. How can you say that? It's your actual birthday. I'm just disappointed that we'll miss out on the celebration because you'll be conquering Hungshan sect that day. He went to the screen to remove his outer robe. Opportunities come only once, but birthdays are every year. She watched his shadow cast on the green silk screen, his neck bent slightly, his hands fumbling at his chest for a long time, struggling to unfasten his clothes. "Xietun," he said, somewhat exasperated, poking his head out. "Could you help me with this?" The intricately embroidered white robe he wore was complicated to put on and take off, yet he loved wearing it, despite never mastering the technique. Who could have imagined that the imposing lord of Shinji Manor would be so helpless in such a situation? Hua Xietun smiled faintly, walked behind the screen, and with a few deft movements, helped him out of his outer garment. He caught a glimpse of her smile. "What are you laughing at?" She glanced at him. "I'm laughing at you." He didn't ask what she was laughing about, just smiled along with her. When he lay down, she took a needle and thread to mend his robe under the lamp, trimming away several of the cumbersome fastenings. In the soft orange glow of the candlelight, she found herself lost in thought again. This robe must be tied to someone special in his heart, right? She had always avoided facing this truth, admitting it was harder than accepting him bringing a courtesan home. No one had ever mentioned it, and he had never made it obvious, but she had a vague feeling that there was someone deep in his heart. She had seen him, at his lowest moment, staring intently at a handkerchief, his gaze distant. From afar, she had only seen that it was a pale yellow silk handkerchief, unable to make out what was embroidered on it. She wasn't without insecurities. Though she was considered both skilled and accomplished as a daughter of the Hua family, she had never been interested in the delicate art of embroidery. Once, she had tried to embroider roses in secret, but when Li Sun saw it, he looked puzzled and asked, "Why are you embroidering a bundle of wire?" After that, she never picked up a needle again. Li Sun's low moments were rare, and she had only seen that handkerchief 2 or 3 times. But she knew where it was. That pale yellow handkerchief was stored in a small sandalwood box, a sign of its significance. "Xietun." Li Sun turned over in bed and lifted his head slightly. "Why aren't you sleeping?" Startled, she pricked her finger. Frowning, she said, "I'm altering your robe so you won't have trouble taking it off next time." "Isn't that what I have you for?" For some reason, her nose stung, and tears welled up in her eyes. When did the thought of leaving first occur? Was it when they conquered the Holy Moon sect of the southern frontier, and Li Sun asked her whether to spare the lives of children under 10? Was it when she presented a scheme to turn the sword-forging tower against itself, leaving no survivors? Was it when Li Sun, filled with ambition, discussed with her how to take control of the 12 waterway villages along the Yangtze River? Or was it when he confessed that he had to act against the Hua family, and she had to remain silent for the sake of his grand plans? Hua Xietun could no longer remember. She walked quietly to the bedside. Li Sun was already asleep, his lips curved in a soft smile, childlike in his peaceful slumber. But the moment he opened his eyes, he would transform into the warrior determined to dominate the martial world, decisive and ruthless when necessary. This was the martial world. Everyone had blood on their hands, even the most righteous heroes, even the most compassionate monks, even her. 5 days later, on Li Sun's 30th birthday, the Hungshan sect's leader was found dead, and the new leader led his disciples to bow down to the Li family manor, swearing allegiance. The Li family's power grew, hinting at its potential to dominate the martial world. By the time this news spread, Hua Xietun had already left the city, riding fast toward the peaceful rivers and lakes of Jiangnan, the place her heart had always longed for. If he was no longer by her side, growing old in a quiet water town might not be such a bad life. Last winter solstice, the two of them had sat by the fire drinking wine. He had been slightly tipsy and said, "Once things settle down, we'll go live in Jiangnan. In the spring, I'll drive the cart, and the wheels will roll along flower-strewn mountain paths. Butterflies will land on the curtains, and the warm breeze will intoxicate us." They would never see that day, would they? Master, the madam has gone missing. Li Sun stirred, pain shooting through his body, and let out a muffled groan. What do you mean she's missing? The doctor behind him was still dressing his wounds. He signaled the attendants who were about to speak and said respectfully, Master, your injuries are serious. Let me finish applying the medicine before you handle this matter. Sword wounds, palm strikes. Killing a sect leader had not been an easy feat. But Li Sun's eyes turned cold, and the attendant immediately handed him a letter. Master, no one in the manor can find Madam. Some of her clothes are missing, and the accounts office reports that she withdrew a sum of silver a few days ago. This letter was found in her room. The letter contained only 2 words, take care. Her elegant handwriting flowed smoothly across the page. Had she hesitated at all while writing those 2 words? Li Sun clenched his fist, and the doctor cried out, the wound is bleeding again. He didn't hear him. His temples throbbed, a pulsing ache threatening to burst. Spread the word, say the madam was kidnapped. But, I said, the madam was kidnapped. His voice was thunderous, and with a sharp crack, the table beside him shattered into pieces, his blood splattering across the shards of wood. In the shocked silence that followed, the invincible lord of the manor collapsed, clutching a single sheet of paper. At the time, Hua Xiaotan and Li Sun had only been married for 3 months, and he was in the middle of a turbulent period. 3 months later, when they met again among the blooming chrysanthemums in the manor garden, it was only their 5th time seeing each other since the wedding. She smiled softly at him from amidst the flowers, and he returned her smile faintly. An orange petal fell and landed in her palm. She caught it gently and said, I buried some chrysanthemum wine in the garden. We can drink it next autumn. The following year, in the fall, he dug up the wine jar, heated it, and the 2 of them shared a quiet drink in the pavilion. Most of the time, they drank in silence, slowly sipping, only occasionally moving the small dishes of food. The still wind and drifting floral fragrance made it feel like they were friends who hadn't seen each other in years. Suddenly, she said to him, if one day you meet a woman you truly love, marry her. If you feel that my presence makes things complicated, then you can divorce me. He asked, what if you meet a man you love one day? Me? She pointed at her own nose, thought for a moment, and said, I'll leave you a letter, and then I'll ride away to find him. I'll leave you a letter, and then I'll ride away to find him. Master, he's vomiting blood again. He's been unconscious for so long. Could something serious have happened? Madam, you've returned? Familiar footsteps, a faint fragrance, and the warmth of a hand. Li Sun struggled to open his eyes, catching a blurry glimpse of a face. The figure in front of him wavered, and the harder he tried to focus, the less he could see. Xiaotan? It's me, she said softly. You'll be all right. He thought he was dreaming. When he woke again, she was asleep by his bedside, and for a moment, he still thought he was dreaming. He reached out, but before his hand could touch her cheek, her lashes fluttered, and she woke up. He quickly withdrew his hand. When she saw he was awake, she was overjoyed and immediately called for the doctor to check on him. His shoulder wound was deep, and he had been treated with medicine for several days, all of which had been administered by her. She never mentioned her departure, but he couldn't hold back. Sometimes, people are like that. Once a wound is healed, even knowing it will hurt to reopen it, the unsightly scar still bothers them, making them want to peel it away. He didn't ask why she came back. Instead, he asked, where did you go? She blew on the medicine to cool it down and brought it to his lips, her eyes avoiding his. Oh, I went out to buy you a birthday gift and didn't realize how far I'd gone. Did you find one? It was a red sword tassel with a complex design. It must have taken great effort to make. She took his sword and, lowering her head, carefully tied the tassel to the hilt. It looked quite fitting. He drank the medicine, the bitterness filling his mouth. He frowned and she noticed. With a smile, she plucked a plum and handed it to him. "I didn't realize you were afraid of bitterness." He smiled back and said, "There are many things I'm afraid of." Why did she come back? Along the way, she had heard various rumors about Lee Sun's injuries. Some said he was on the verge of death. Some said he was unconscious. Some claimed his meridians had been severed, and others even said he had died coughing up blood. Each version made her heart race with fear. How could she leave without a second thought when his life was uncertain? Even though she knew this was a rare chance, just as Lee Sun had once said, opportunities come only once. The uncertainty of his fate gnawed at her, making it impossible for her to continue on her way. Her return was a warning. Although Lee Sun didn't press her for details and even refrained from mentioning the letter she had left behind with only the words, "Take care," he was far too clever to have missed the implications. He must have realized that on that day his wife, Hua Xiaotan, had done something monumental in secret. So, were the subtle changes in his behavior not just her imagination? He used a flawless excuse to isolate her from the outside world. To the public, "I've said you were kidnapped by the Kongtong sect. You'll have to stay in this secluded place for a while. Don't show yourself. If you need anything, just ask the maids." It was a remote estate owned by the Li family. After she moved in, the security became tighter than ever, with even the maids being skilled in martial arts. Her own skills were not weak, so she could easily sense the hidden guards, warriors assigned to keep an eye on her. He was starting to guard against her, wasn't he? After all, she knew too many of his secrets. Any one of them could ruin his reputation in the martial world. She began to regret her recent actions. She hadn't left cleanly, nor had she returned unnoticed. All she had done was divide his focus, making him more cautious of her. Lee Sun worked hard to make everything seem just as it had been before. Each evening, he came to talk with her, discussing how to eliminate the power of the Kongtong sect or how to recruit a certain martial arts master. She tended to his wound, which was healing quickly, with new skin already forming. He always brought his sword with him, the red tassel swaying on the scabbard. Sometimes, Hua Xiaotan would wonder whether him always carrying the sword, with the tassel she had given him, was some kind of symbol of his feelings. But then she would laugh at herself for being unrealistic. The sword was his life. He never went anywhere without it. Why was she now having these whimsical, romantic thoughts? In the past, she had accepted the reality of their relationship and had been content with their respectful, distant interactions. Could it be that now, sensing that their peaceful days were coming to an end, the emotions she had suppressed for so long were stirring, unwilling to dry up completely? The Li family manor had an intricate intelligence network, and Lee Sun investigated Hua Xiaotan's past, but he found no trace of the man she was supposedly searching for. Upon reflection, there had never been any sign of her having close interactions with any man. In fact, throughout all these years, the only man in her life was him. She didn't enjoy conversing with other men, whether it was the servants in the manor, the martial artists they encountered, or the heroes of the martial world. One summer, they had business in Sichuan, and he took her to a famous local tavern for a drink. He remembered how hot it was, how she had worn a light yellow silk dress with matching embroidered shoes, fanning herself lazily with a paper fan as the cool breeze washed over them. All the men in the tavern were watching her. One particularly handsome young man, reckless in his approach, came over, introduced himself, and boldly assumed, "Brother, you are as talented as your sister is beautiful. Might I have the honor of making her acquaintance?" Lee Sun thought she would at least politely clarify that he wasn't her brother, but her husband. To his surprise, she ignored the young man entirely and instead continued to pour wine into his cup, as if she hadn't heard a word. The young man, embarrassed but persistent, introduced himself again, but she merely fanned herself lazily and didn't respond. It was Lee Sun who finally sent the young man away. He had told her, that was the famous jade-faced gentleman. "Just another flirt," she had scoffed. "Next time, I'll dress as a man." Even in male attire, her allure couldn't be concealed. Her red lips and bright eyes made it clear that her disguise was futile. He had laughed and said, "Then I won't bring you along next time." Because of incidents like this, he never thought she had fallen for someone else, and he assumed their quiet, distant relationship would last a lifetime. But out of nowhere, a dramatic change had caught him off guard, leaving him furious. The worst part was that he couldn't even express this anger. How infuriating! A steward knocked on the door and entered, bringing the manor's financial records for his review. Lee Sun quickly concealed his emotions, watching the young steward with a calm expression. The steward, at 25 years old, began to sweat under his gaze, stammering, "And master, is there something wrong?" "Nothing. I was just thinking that you're getting to an age where you should find yourself a wife." In what seemed like the blink of an eye, every unmarried man under 30 in the manor got married. This was the first thing Hua Xiaotan noticed when she returned to the Li Manor. The manor was suddenly full of unfamiliar women, and at a family feast, Li Sun introduced them all to her with uncharacteristic patience. "This is so-and-so's wife," he said, pointing at one. "And this is so-and-so's new bride." It was nearing the end of the year, and the Kongtong sect had been defeated, officially submitting to the Li family's power. Hua Xiaotan had returned home, as expected. She sat in her rightful place as the lady of the manor, while Lu Banlian sat just below her. Li Sun introduced her, saying, "This is Miss Banlian, the youngest daughter of Senior Lu. She'll be staying at the manor for a while." What young lady stays at another man's home during the new year? The way Li Sun introduced her, his tone and expression, sent a thunderous realization crashing into Hua Xiaotan's mind. She was the one. His heart had finally found its person. Li Sun soon confirmed her suspicions with his actions. He treated Lu Banlian with extraordinary care, serving her food during meals and kindly urging her to eat more. Sometimes, they could be seen strolling together in the garden, their manner close and affectionate. Lu Banlian would always call him Brother Sun, a title that grated on Hua Xiaotan's nerves. The ever-sensitive servants, picking up on the shift in power, began treating Lu Banlian with more respect. And Lu Banlian, sensing the shift herself, acted as if she were already half the mistress of the manor, giving orders without hesitation. Though polite and respectful to Hua Xiaotan, Lu Banlian's daily visits to pay her respects felt like the formalities of a concubine. Hua Xiaotan grew weary of these false courtesies, especially since most of Lu Banlian's conversations revolved around Li Sun. One day, Lu Banlian said to Hua Xiaotan, "I know your marriage to Brother Sun was arranged by your parents, and that there's no real love between you two. But don't worry, when I marry Brother Sun, I won't ask him to divorce you. I know Brother Sun has many responsibilities and isn't always free to make his own choices." How much she knew. Hua Xiaotan's annoyance grew, and she suddenly had no patience for playing along with this sisterly charade. With a wave of her hand, she said, "Go back. I'm tired." Lu Banlian, stunned, left in a daze. Hua Xiaotan stood by the window until nightfall, waves of bitterness washing over her heart. Was she sad? No, not at all. She had known this day would come sooner or later. But still, he shouldn't have disregarded her pride and shared everything with Lu Banlian. What she had once told him, "If one day you meet a woman you love, then marry her. If my presence complicates things, give me a divorce," wasn't a statement of open-mindedness or magnanimity. It was her declaration of pride and self-respect. On New Year's Eve, Li Sun stayed with Hua Xiaotan to keep watch through the night. She hadn't expected him to come, so she hadn't prepared any food or drink. She was sitting alone under the lamp, cutting paper decorations. Snow clung to his shoulders as he brushed it off casually and said, "I'm not hungry. Just have someone warm some wine." He glanced at the paper cuttings she had made, and she tidied up the table, insisting on making a few small dishes for him. Li Sun loved to drink, but he never remembered that drinking on an empty stomach could harm his health. Outside, the night was lively, filled with the sounds of fireworks and firecrackers. Hua Xiaotan felt sleepy. She wasn't one for staying up late, and each year, she would fall asleep early, only to be woken up by Lee Sun at the appointed time. He had already lifted the curtain to the inner room, and for a moment, she hesitated before sitting back down at the table. "I'll stay up with you." Lee Sun raised his eyebrows in surprise. Lowering her eyes, she took a sip of the warm wine and asked, "When do you plan to marry Miss Liu?" His brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't respond. She continued, "I'm not one to share a husband with another woman." At that, she glanced at him. His eyes flickered, and Hua Xiaotan's heart sank. He had been waiting for her to say this. "So, before you marry her, I'll need a letter of divorce, so I can leave with proper justification." The room fell into silence. After a long pause, Lee Sun finally said, "I'll think about it. If you feel it's not the right time yet, we don't need to announce the divorce publicly. I understand that often your hands are tied. If you're worried about wronging Miss Liu, you can marry her as your primary wife." Hua Xiaotan lay back in bed, her eyes closed, unable to fall asleep. She could hear the maids knocking on the door to bring wine, and the sound of Lee Sun refilling his cup echoed without pause. She didn't know how much time had passed when she heard the creak of the inner door being pushed open by his heavy footsteps. She thought he was coming to wake her, so she propped herself up on her elbow. But before she could sit up fully, he leaned over her, the scent of alcohol filling the air. Forced to lie back down, she raised a hand to push him away. "Lee Sun, I'll call someone to help you rest. Let's skip the vigil tonight." Her heart raced wildly, her face flushed with embarrassment. Lee Sun pinned her down so she couldn't move, a low, muffled sound escaping his throat. Just as she was about to speak again, he lowered his head, silencing her with a kiss, his hands roughly tearing at her clothes. She had always said their relationship was like that of friends, but only like friends. No friends would ever engage in such intimate acts. In all their years of marriage, he had desired her before, but it always felt like a routine. They would drink a little, extinguish the lights, and in the darkness, nothing could be seen. He had always been gentle, careful not to hurt her. But never had he been like this. His hands, rough and callous, seemed to hurt her skin wherever they touched. His forceful actions and the strength with which he held her filled her with both anger and shame. He bit at every inch of her skin, forced her legs apart, and every thrust felt like a dagger plunging into her heart. Her body ached so much that she didn't even have the strength to move away and sleep elsewhere. Lying on her side, she stared at the skylight. A faint light filtered in, and in the distance, the sound of the New Year's bell tolled softly. It was the new year. She bit her lip, and tears slid down her cheeks, dampening her disheveled hair. Though Lee Sun had fallen asleep, she could feel him stirring behind her, his hands sliding from her back to her chest. He clearly wasn't content with just holding her. His hands roamed down her body, seeking more. Hua Xiaotan arched her body in protest. "Lee Sun, I'm tired." "You can't be tired," he murmured, his words still laced with drunkenness as he bit her earlobe. "I haven't had enough of you yet." Her face burned with shame as he flipped her over, his dark eyes boring into hers. "I just wonder, what kind of man would want a woman who's no longer pure? Maybe you're even better in bed with more experience." He thrust into her, and Hua Xiaotan felt a sudden sharp pain, unsure whether it was in her heart or somewhere else. After a night of torment, Hua Xiaotan rose in the morning to bathe, her body covered in bruises. Lee Sun left with a casual "sorry, I drank too much last night," and walked away as if nothing had happened. Hua Xiaotan sank into the water, thinking how convenient it was to blame everything on drunkenness. For several days after that, Lee Sun avoided her. That was fine. She wasn't sure how she should face him either. Though it was a perfectly normal occurrence for husband and wife to share a bed, it felt as if some invisible barrier had been broken, and now they could no longer interact as calmly as before. Lee Sun's letter of divorce didn't arrive, and neither did Hua Xiaotan's monthly cycle. When the physician came to congratulate her, her expression froze, and she found herself in a daze, her long-held suspicions finally confirmed. She had wondered for a long time why they hadn't had children despite being married for so many years. Secretly, she had sought out a physician to examine her, and he had found no issues with her health. The physician had once hinted that the problem might lie with Lee Sun, but she hadn't dared to confront it, always reassuring herself that the time simply wasn't right. How was she supposed to face the brutal reality that Lee Sun had deliberately prevented her from having children? From the very first night of their marriage, he had already made up his mind. On New Year's Eve, he must have been too drunk to take his usual precautions, and that's why she had conceived. Hua Xiaotan handed the physician some silver and said, "Go tell the master that I'm pregnant. But make sure you tell him I don't know about it. I asked you to check my pulse for peace of mind." If he didn't want his child, then neither did she. Hua Xiaotan laughed bitterly. In that case, there was no reason for her to stay, especially after what had happened that night. I just wonder, what kind of man would want a woman who's no longer pure? Maybe you're even better in bed with more experience. Those humiliating words, dripping with disdain and contempt, how could he have said them? The so-called friendship they had maintained, it was all just her delusion, her own wishful thinking. She clutched her chest, feeling a sharp pain, far worse than anything she had felt over the years. Her breathing quickened, her heart feeling as though it was being crushed by a heavy stone, and with each rise and fall, she felt herself suffocating. "Madam, madam, someone help. The madam has fainted." Why didn't Lu Banlian, like Hua Xiaotan? It wasn't just because Hua Xiaotan was the lady of the Li family manor and Li Sun's official wife. It was also because Hua Xiaotan always acted as if she didn't care about anything, yet still possessed all the best things in the world. Clearly, Hua Xiaotan had martial skills, yet she always behaved in a fragile, delicate manner, as if she needed protection. How utterly annoying. And now, Hua Xiaotan had merely fainted due to her heart condition, and the whole manor was thrown into disarray because of her. Li Sun was focused entirely on Hua Xiaotan, not even sparing Lu Banlian a glance. Using this tactic to get Li Sun's attention, if it weren't for her being a daughter of the Hua family, Li Sun wouldn't even bother with her. Grinding her teeth in frustration, Lu Banlian passed by the study and suddenly stopped in her tracks. She overheard Li Sun's voice, broken and faint. Pregnant, she can't have the baby, too dangerous, safflower, will harm her body. In an instant, Lu Banlian's expression changed, and a bright smile spread across her face. She knew it. How could Li Sun ever truly care about Hua Xiaotan? Lu Banlian felt a wave of joy wash over her. What good was it for Hua Xiaotan to go through all that effort to get pregnant with Li Sun's child? She had always been nothing more than a pawn in Li Sun's game. How could he ever allow a mere pawn to give birth to the Li family's heir? If Hua Xiaotan fainting had thrown the entire Li family manor into chaos, then her disappearance this time left everyone too terrified to even breathe. This time was different from the last. She left behind a letter, but it wasn't a plea or explanation. It was a divorce letter. She had divorced Li Sun. Even from several feet away, one could feel the cold, murderous aura radiating from Li Sun. No one dared to approach him, and all the servants knelt, trembling in fear. Hua Xiaotan hadn't taken anything with her. Her room was untouched, and nothing was missing. Li Sun's face was grim as he stared at a bloodstain on the floor. Only Lu Banlian, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, approached with a pleased look on her face. She believed Li Sun's anger was due to the humiliation of being left by his wife. Smiling, she offered, "Brother Sun, I helped ease your troubles. I brewed a bowl of safflower tea for her. I told her that you didn't want her to have the child. She drank it. Of course, she drank it. How could she keep the child when you didn't want it? She would have been shameless not to. Though, I didn't expect she'd have the strength to run off after losing the baby in the middle of the night. No one even saw her leave. I guess the Hua family's stepping without a trace technique really is impressive. You can't blame the servants." Crack, crack. The sound of Li Sun's joints cracking echoed ominously. "Lu Banlian, I don't hit women." "Brother Sun, What are you talking about? Get out of the Li family manor. Brother Sun. Lu Banlian's eyes widened in shock as she reached for his arm. What did I do wrong? You've always cared for me. I only ever cared for you to spite Xietan. Li Sun flung her to the ground and barked. If it weren't for my quarrel with her, you wouldn't have even been allowed past the gates of the Li family manor. If I ever see you again, even if it means offending Senior Lu, I will ensure you suffer for the rest of your life. Lu Banlian scrambled to grab hold of his sleeve, but as Li Sun jerked away, her hand caught on the sword tassel hanging from his waist. The string of beads snapped, and the entire tassel unraveled. Startled, Li Sun quickly gathered the scattered beads, but as he did, he noticed a small piece of paper hidden within the loosened tassel. He carefully pulled it out and unfolded it, revealing 3 tiny, elegantly written words. I love you. In that instant, it was as if everything around him ceased to exist. His vision blurred, and all he could see were those 3 words floating before him. Li Sun's body trembled, his face contorted in pain. She loved him. She loved him all along. And yet, he had let her lose their child, let her leave, cold and heartbroken, running away into the bitter snow. Xietan, he choked on his words, anguish overwhelming him as a single tear slipped down his face. After 2 years of searching, he finally found her in Jiangnan. He rode hard the entire way, exhausting several horses, desperately wishing to see her again. But when he actually stood before her, a wave of hesitation washed over him. She had become thinner, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame. He stood there for a long time, struggling to gather the courage to call out to her. Eventually, Hua Xietan noticed him as she finished burying a flower, turning around to look at him. He was momentarily at a loss for words. Xietan. She smiled and asked, How did you know my name? He froze, feeling as though his hands and feet had turned to ice. You don't recognize me? Hua Xietan studied him closely, her expression slowly shifting to realization. You're here to find me? You must be Li Sun, right? Even that sudden recognition failed to bring back any memories for her. Li Sun felt his heart sink. He was left speechless, unable to move or speak, his shock rendering him immobile. Hua Xietan took a step forward, rummaging through her belongings to pull out a letter. Don't be surprised. It's not like I'm some kind of oracle. There was a letter from a sister in my luggage, addressed to you. So you must be Li Sun. He took the letter and opened it, his eyes filling with tears as he read the words. She had told him to let her go. She had written that she drank the forgetfulness potion and wouldn't remember his secrets, reassuring him to not worry. Wow, you have secrets that you need to chase her for, she teased. Actually, I have one big secret she doesn't know, he replied, his voice low. What is it? She asked, curious. I love her. Hua Xietan paused, taken aback. Your wife doesn't even know that. No, she doesn't. Li Sun's voice was filled with despair. She doesn't know that I first met her when she was 16. He recounted the memory of that day. She had been learning embroidery with her aunts in the corridor, drawing 2 fake eyes on her eyelids as she sneaked a nap in the sunlight. The sun had been bright, and her small head bobbed gently as she slept. He had thought her to be an extremely mischievous girl, but when her aunt scolded her, she had obediently listened, her face serious. After being scolded, she took up a needle and began stitching under the sun. The pale yellow handkerchief she had thrown back was embroidered with the words, "Threading a needle cannot compare to being a hero." She hadn't dared to show her embroidered handkerchief to her aunts, so she tossed it behind her into the flowers. You picked up her handkerchief and went to propose. Hua Xietan speculated, mimicking the scene. You must have been charming. So surely your family accepted? Marrying her wasn't easy at all. Since she had a history of heart problems, her family was extremely protective of her and always cautious about choosing a husband. They required that he treat her well and ensure she wouldn't be wronged, but also that he wouldn't pressure her to have children. I thought I could meet their demands, but her family didn't trust me enough and insisted on asking for her consent first. Anxious, He paced back and forth in the hall. He was filled with various fears. He worried she would refuse because she had never met him, or he speculated her family would only listen to the elder's wishes. He had so many thoughts racing through his mind until Hua Xiaotan's father brought him good news. She agreed to the marriage. In that moment, he had felt overjoyed, thinking she must have had feelings for him too. But once they were married, she treated him indifferently, without the intimacy or affection between lovers. He thought he had misread the situation, unaware that her pride prevented her from revealing her true feelings without first knowing his own. "I'm also a proud person," he continued. "I always thought that if she didn't like me, then why should I let her know how I felt? But it was my mistake." Hua Xiaotan nodded in agreement. "It's okay. You should go find her and tell her your feelings. Then she won't blame you for hiding it for so long." Li Sun shook his head. "But she drank the forgetfulness potion and doesn't remember me anymore." "Hey, you're being foolish. The fact that she doesn't remember is actually a good thing. You can start fresh." Starting over. It felt as if a realization had struck him, and Li Sun straightened up. "She loves Jiangnan, so I'll stay here to find her." "Exactly. I've lost my silver and have nowhere to stay. Miss Xiaotan, how about you let me stay with you?" "Huh." Hua Xiaotan furrowed her brow, momentarily at a loss. "That wouldn't be very convenient, would it?" "Miss Xiaotan, managing such a large flower garden alone must be overwhelming at times, right? You can provide me with food and shelter without having to pay me, and I'll do all the heavy lifting for you, ensuring you don't suffer any hardship." She hesitated, still unsure. "You really don't seem like someone who would do manual labor." "It's fine. I'll get used to it as I go along." He strode confidently into the room. "Where's my room?"